Welcome back everyone to another video, and in this one we'll talk about the story of Tizen OS. Tizen OS, as you all know, is Samsung's answer to Android and open source OS based on Linux. But what's the story behind it? Why it's not really prominent in the market? And we look at some more facts and of course run a few emulations just to give you an idea what using Tizen OS really feels like. So, what I really want to talk in this one is about the rich history of Tizen OS and what all actually led up to the creation of this particular operating system. So, I think nothing can better describe that other than this chart, that we can find on Wikipedia. So, I'll probably link it. It's on the Tizen OS's main page, so it's pretty easy to find. So the story starts with Nokia actually investing in another great Linux-based operating system called Miemo, and it was I think in the N9 or some device like this, the N900 or something. It was on a normal brick style phone, and it was on a flip phone that had the full QWERTY keypad. So no, that was a very decent operating system based on it was GNU Linux. As far as I know, not something like Android that just uses the kernel. But it went through a lot of iterations, but there were internal management issues in Nokia where the management decided to distribute what little developer resources they had into basically improving the Symbian OS. Symbian, Annie, and Bella that came out later, improving that into the development of Miamo, which was again a very nice little Linux OS that they had, and then investing in Windows OS or at that time of the very young Android OS. So I think they completely slashed down Android OS because they actually had a Trojan sent by Microsoft in their management. I'm not talking about a Trojan as in a virus, but actually a person from Microsoft in the board of directors of Nokia, and that it tends to happen with bigger companies. So they had the influence of Microsoft, and then their developer resources being distributed very heavily between Symbian and Miamo. And eventually, what happened? The Miamo project died. The Symbian came to a halt because there wasn't much developer interest on Symbian, and basically Microsoft just took over. And now with Nokia, we are just back to square one, running Android on Nokia phones. So it's again back to running a Linux-based distribution, but I would have liked to see Miamo go further than where it had been. So later on Miamo stage, it actually went on to a great project called Migo, and I've done a video on Migo a while back. It was a fairly nostalgic experience for me as well as a whole lot of people who actually viewed the video. It was a very great operating system in terms of the UI, a very refreshing UI. Actually, I can show you guys a screenshot again from Wikipedia. So in this user interface, you can see that this is what basically didn't expand that much. So it was basically a home page for a tablet like user interface, but if you watch my video, went really well with laptops as well. So it was a really nice OS. Sadly, it was always in sort of a development stage, never really came out with a bang, and it had some issues that it was getting very old, and the core of Migo wasn't really being developed a whole lot, and there was um, issues with HTML5 or maybe optimizing Migo for HTML5 or something like that, and it never really got released properly. But uh, it was a great OS, and people enjoyed it while it lasted. That sort of Migo directly contributed to the Tizen's mobile division and IVI division, because Migo also had an IVI build or in vehicle infotainment build. It was seriously nice looking. So let me just show you. And this was actually the UI. And if you would have seen, I think, this UI in one of the Fast and Furious movies, I don't really remember. He is actually someone using it, but it was a fairly decent experience, and all of that actually went on to the Tizen OS. And actually, for a fair bit of time, if you went into the Migos website, it actually said that it has now transitioned into Tizen. So I'll just try that. Alright, so right now, if you go to migo.com, it just transitions you to tizen.org. That's all it does. And on the Wayback Machine, if we go to migo.com and see a fairly old page. Let's see. Yeah, and this is the actual page when it went down. So you can see we have Migo for notebooks, Migo for IVI, and the Migo SDK that you can download. But uh, as you can see that the project is now sort of gone into Tizen here, and then why not just evolve Migo? We believe that the future belongs to HTML5 based applications and outside a relatively small percentage of apps. Blah blah blah. Shifting to HTML5 doesn't mean slapping a web runtime on an existing Linux. And That's what they basically gave up, and Tizen was born. Uh, all right, so that's the story of Migo and Tizen. And Intel had their own project called Moblin that got merged into Migo again. So Miamo and Moblin basically made Migo, which went to Tizen. Samsung, of course, had their own OS called Bada or whatever you want to call it, and or SLP or and Samsung Linux platform that was also sort of that existed and then went away pretty quick. That also resulted into Tizen, and then there was some Limo Foundation, which is basically Linux for mobile or something like that. I don't really remember that really well. I had read about it, but that also went into Tizen. So Tizen has that great history of really good projects coming together to make it, and it will just was sort of a disappointment in the community's eye. They didn't really uh, sort of expect this to happen. They had high expectations coming from its rich ancestry, but didn't really make it through. So that's probably way too much about Tizen. First almost 10 minutes of the video. So let's go ahead, run some emulations, talk around a bit more later in the video about Tizen and on what I think of it. So there we go. We have the Tizen Studio emulator. Wasn't really easy getting something like this to work for some reason. I had issues with running it on Fedora, and it wouldn't run. It really needed the Ubuntu environment, and then even on Ubuntu, it wouldn't run OpenGDK. It needed Oracle GDK and JDK, and I just ended up spending a lot of time just to install and run the emulators. But let's go ahead, run the emulators and see what's what. So earlier Samsung just intended to be a replacement for Android. Let's start with that. The mobile emulator, for some reason, just there we go. So booting the kernel again, the next XYZ version. We'll see what version there is, but it's just loading it, and that's the boot animation. Tizen boots up, and there's a home screen. So I'm curious what Linux version it is. I'm sure. Alright, so it's 4.4. Okay. Android's using the same right now, apart from a few phones. But let's go ahead and unlock this. Alright, so we have, instead of apps, just simple calendar, so we can actually look at what date it is, which is kind of nice. Moving on, we basically have our different home screen, which I think we can add apps to or not. Is it possible to add apps? Okay, edit, add widgets, change wallpaper, and it doesn't really show a whole lot, does it? Now change wallpaper. Let's see what we've got. Yikes! Yikes! All right. Let's forget about all of that. Move on to apps. Very basic, minimal. I mean, this is a minimal kind of like AOSP. Doesn't really have a whole lot of apps. But we have a file manager, music player. I think it's pretty standard. A very basic UI all over. Settings is sort of what you would see on Android. Actually, it's basically a copy of the Android settings. About device at the end, manage certificate, legal info, and all of that good stuff. Status wouldn't show us a whole lot. Going back, storage. I mean, we are just basically talking about an OS that is trying to be Android and being light at the same time and never really ends well. If you want to be Android, you need to be a bit on the heavy side. So, this is sort of the emulated camera, just playing one clip over and over again. And if I take an image, it just no, or if I want to record it, whatever. So that here is your images and recording, I guess. Let's go back. So the notification bar is more or less what you would see from a Samsung Galaxy phone. Uh, Pretty basic. I guess that's about it. So let's talk a little bit about what happened to Tizen and why it never really took off. So there's two perspectives to look at. When you look at a developer's perspective, there was a lot of crap given to the how the operating system in Tizen was coded, and a lot of people were really angry about its security issues that it had. Wasn't very secure. OS wasn't really coded all that well, and I've heard article from researchers going as far as saying this was coded by someone who is submitting a college project, so it's not really professional, and people always had issues with it, um, and that really didn't went well for Tizen. But when you take a look at from a customer's perspective, they don't really care. He probably wouldn't even go as far as looking into the about device section and legal information or open source, and doesn't care. You go out there, ask an average person holding a Samsung OS, you would be lucky to have them say it's an Android phone. You would be very lucky to have them say it's an Android phone running Android version XYZ. Apart from that, they don't really care. What they do care about is the app ecosystem. If a new operating system comes and it doesn't have the core apps, your Facebook app, your Snapchat app, Instagram, WhatsApp, and other messaging services, that may be something like WeChat, that's more relevant in China. If it doesn't really have all those apps, it's not going to work with the consumer, and that's the people you're targeting. You're not targeting the developers to buy these phones, and that really didn't end well. And again, other example of look at Windows, people are still using it, and I mean it's not that bad, but they are still using it, and people don't care. Whether it's not open source or whether it's very open to bugs and viruses and whatnot, but people don't care because it has a great app ecosystem. You can get an x86 app. You cannot get all the programs or the easily used stuff like Adobe or other software suites for something like Ubuntu or Linux, or in very rare cases like games, you can't even have them on Mac OS. But people still use it because there are a lot of apps to use. Same with iOS and Android. Both of them have extremely great app ecosystems, and it's seriously hard to beat that, especially for someone that's really new in the mobile market. That's why something like Ubuntu phone closed down, and that's why something like Firefox OS never really took off. There was never a decent app ecosystem, and they honestly were never able to beat the likes of Android and iOS. So that was sort of the combined story of why Tizen failed as a mobile operating system. But what it succeeded in, sort of, was the watch market because it was very new. The wearables market was very new and it came in quick. So let's take a look at that now. And of course, the emulator started on the wrong screen. Alright, so this is the Galaxy Gear emulator or the Watch Tizen OS emulator. So all the Galaxy Gear watches that you buy come with this particular OS installed, and that's Tizen OS. And they sell really well. The Galaxy Gear S3 sold like hotcake. A lot of people have it, and it's actually doing fairly well, way better than anticipated. Um, and the fact that they got a few things right, it's a very light OS. So now when I was the buying my smartwatch, the reason I ended up with uh, the watch that I have right now, that's the Zen Watch 3, is that I didn't have really an issue with the ecosystem and all of that stuff because you don't really run all that many apps on your watch. um, but the reason was again the researchers saying that Tizen OS is extremely uh, buggy and has issues with security and whatnot. And even at the time I bought this, I read the articles again and again, and they were saying that the situation hasn't improved a whole lot. So I ended up buying the watch, the Zen Watch 3. But incidentally, what happened was Asus decided to close down their watch division. That meant no more security updates, no more updates in general, and then we are back on the same page. So yeah, you can't really buy a $200 smartwatch and be sure of an update. What you can do is go ahead and buy a much more costlier watch, is something like the like Casio has. That's a really great watch, but it's $500 or $300 more than I was willing to spend at that time. And even for something like a good smartwatch, it's better to go with a watch manufacturer rather than a mobile phone manufacturer. But they tend to be extremely expensive at that price point. So back to Galaxy Gear, they got a few things right. It was extremely light. It is extremely light, and then it has a great user interface. I love it. They actually use, I don't know if you can tell, but the top bar actually physically moves on every Galaxy, or at least Galaxy Gear S3, and that's the main user interface. That and a single tap, so you can scroll through your apps. And the reason that it works so perfectly is that your fingers are just too big for a watch screen to move it precisely, and that has issues while scrolling through menus and all of that stuff. And using the outer ring to move it perfectly, it just works well. And it's stepped in terms, you can actually feel it move. It has grooves, so it moves in a stepper motor kind of a way. But yeah, the UI is just extremely well. So you just move it with the outer ring. So let's say I have to go into settings, and then you tap the center key or the center of the watch, and then you go into your menu, the app that you selected. So watch face settings, you can select watch face and whatnot. And it's a fairly comprehensive OS for a watch, still light. And just like that, you can just go into different applications. You want to select your phone, call someone, go into the dialer. You can just select it with a watch ring, and then go to your gallery, take a look at some photos or whatnot. go back, you have your watch faces and what notification you want, pulls down some basic settings, airplane mode and whatnot. So this is the operating system that took off for Samsung. You won't see it anything else other than Samsung phones. Would I recommend using a Galaxy Gear device? Maybe not, because of the security issues that I have seen and heard about. So I'm a bit skeptical on that. I mean, again, it's your decision at the end if you want to go ahead and use it. It's a really nice device if you ignore the security bit. But with IoT and all of that stuff, or recently with wearables, if it gets compromised, it can do a certain amount of damage. So that's probably about it. Let's power that off. Now it does have a third counterpart, and that's the Tizen TV. That's sort of a mixed story at this point. Let's go ahead and launch it. Alright, so there's the TV booting up. That's the emulator, little nice remote there and your whole screen. Let's just wait it to boot up. And there we go, we are probably booted up. Now with the TV, it's sort of a mixed bag. Again, you can only get this on Samsung TVs. There are issue of app compatibility and what apps you can run and not. I don't think YouTube has an official app yet, some other stuff like that. Again, security is a thing with Tizen which people just talk about all the time. It's a fairly minimal TV OS. I think Android is pretty comprehensive and people do like it. And if you are someone like Nvidia, you take advantage of this, and then you have your Nvidia's own Shield TVs which can play really good games, which are basically ports of PC games like War of Thunder, I think, and that's a direct port, and you can play that on 4K, and it's a beautiful and a very graphically demanding game, and the Nvidia TV can, the Shield TV can do it pretty well. Apart from that, this was a bare bones TV, and people really want all their apps like Prime Video, Hulu, Netflix, YouTube on their TV if they are buying a smart TV. Otherwise, it's basically useless. So, I think that was all about the TV that could be. Go into settings, they are just basic settings, brightness, color, and contrast. Even if you go into all settings, there's probably just picture, network, and system. So that's about it about the Tizen TV. Again, it's only available on Tizen, doesn't really have a whole great app ecosystem, and falls behind a whole bunch of things. So the only thing left is for Tizen to take out a. So I guess the only thing that's left for Samsung to do is to use Tizen and release a smart home speaker which has Bixby installed. I mean, I'd still prefer Bixby over something like Siri, but there we have it. The story of Tizen OS and why I don't own a Tizen based phone, smartwatch, or a TV. As a matter of fact, I don't own a TV at all. I just own a smartwatch and an Android phone. So, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this small video, kind of a rant on Tizen. And the main reason I'm so negative about Tizen is that it was a result of a lot of great projects being killed off, and the result wasn't as good and as ambitious as expected. So that's about it. My take on Tizen OS. I'm really surprised I never really did a Tizen OS only video before. I did one on it running on the Raspberry Pi, but that was only the core Tizen part, not really the UI element as well. But I guess that's about it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.